NOPD investigations find Mayor Latoya Cantrell's former bodyguard may have committed crimes.
Olivia Vidal is here now to break down the former NOPD officer's potential violations. Good morning, Olivia.
Lucy and Kelsey, some of the findings were turned over to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Fox 8 obtained 2 Public Integrity Bureau reports completed by the PIB and an outside law firm that the city hired. The reports find former Officer Jeffrey Vappie drank alcohol while on duty for the NOPD during 2 different occasions with Mayor Cantrell. Now, photographs of the mayor and Vappie at 2 high-end New Orleans restaurants prompted the 2 PIB investigations. After receiving photos of the 2 dining together at Tableau in the French Quarter back in April, the Metropolitan Crime Commission filed its first complaint with PIB, seeking a probe into several potential rule violations. According to the final report on that complaint, the pair consumed alcohol while Vappie was on the clock and carrying a firearm. The Metropolitan Crime Commission filed a second complaint after it obtained a photo of the pair dining at Doris Metropolitan in July of 2022. That PIB report finds Vappie drank wine at a bar with Mayor Cantrell while on duty. The Public Integrity Bureau sustained 13 violations against Vappie, who retired from the NOPD in June before the PIB reports were complete. The PIB and the outside law firm also identified potential criminal violations, which were turned over to federal authorities, who indicted Vappie on wire fraud and false statement charges in July. The mayor and Vappie have both repeatedly denied a romantic relationship and both refused to be interviewed for these investigations. Rafael Goyeneche with the Metropolitan Crime Commission. He says policies were written to prevent executive protection members from socializing with the mayor, but he says those policies weren't followed.
That's another flaunting in the face of the police department and the mayor flaunting her authority as mayor, saying that the officer that she's involved in a relationship with, the rules don't apply to him. The rules don't apply to her.
One of the PIB reports indicates the mayor and Vappie toasted on the balcony of Tableau. The report says Mayor Cantrell lacks the authority to authorize alcohol use by members of her executive protection team while on duty. Goyeneche says the PIB reports could further bolster a potential federal charge against the mayor. Now, we've reached out to the attorneys for Mayor Cantrell and Vappie, and we're still waiting